Well, welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Psych and Theo. We are going to get rolling here on the third installment of spiritual warfare, demon possession, and mental health. In this episode, I'm going to get to interview Sam. So Sam talked to me for 2 episodes about biblical worldview and the spiritual realm and things like that. And so now we're going to spin it around, and we're going to talk about the topic of demon possession as it relates to the topic of mental health profession, the mental health profession. And Sam has just turned his hat backwards, so you know he is down to brawl here. And
like Over the Top. Did you ever see that movie?
Yeah. The arm wrestling movie. Oh yeah.
Podcast mode.
Yeah. Yeah. So okay, here we go. So again, just to preface this, our audience, we're talking about something that's heavy. We're talking about the dark side and essentially how to take out the trash. I like what I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous episodes or if I just was talking to someone about this, but something I read as I was doing my research on this topic, which I've read a lot of books on it. Something that there was a Catholic exorcist by the name of Malachi Martin. He wrote a couple books on the subject just about his experiences, and in a small little book where he was being interviewed by a journalist, the journalist asked him something about should people study this, or what is it like to study this topic? Should people study it? And he said no, they shouldn't focus or study this topic too in depth, because it's like studying sewage or studying the trash. It's like you have to know some things about it just to be safe. But someone who becomes obsessed with sewage or becomes obsessed with trash, that person's not mentally healthy. So if you focus too much on the trash and the sewage, it starts to warp you. Yep. And I've seen that with people where they get into this topic, and then it's like one step leads to another down the paranormal train, and they get into all kinds of crazy topics where it's not bad to learn a little bit about those things like UFOs and the alien phenomenon and all that other stuff. But it could very easily take people down these rabbit holes where it kind of warps their mind. And I think what you said in one of the previous episodes was obsession. Yeah. Where they become obsessed and paranoid with a topic like this. So we just want to caution our audience, we're addressing this issue biblically and from a standpoint of informing people of how to think properly about this without buying into the Hollywood myths of being terrified and of the subject, but also not just becoming so obsessed with it where, as Paul says, you get taken away, you get drawn away from the simplicity of Christ. And instead of witnessing to people and worrying about the normal day-to-day of being a Christian, you become this demon hunter. I'm going to go out and fight the battles, and you just become a very weird person. Right. Or worse, you open yourself up to danger. So anyway, so this is not my episode. This is your episode. So let's get into this. But anyway, so yeah, just our audience, if you got little ones listening, just, caution, we're going to be talking about some heavy things here. Okay, Sam, let's get into this. So just to recap with our audience, the last 2 episodes, we talked about biblical worldview and the spiritual realm and how to understand the hierarchy of the powers of darkness and how to read in the New Testament, how to understand that in light of the gospel and the Great Commission and taking the gospel to the world and all those things. But amidst the grand narrative of spreading the gospel to the world, there is this granular, individual, personal problem of demon possession, which is a real thing. We see examples of that in the New Testament. The church fathers talk about it in church history. There's examples of it all throughout church history. So it's an issue that the church has been aware of for thousands of years. Shows up in almost every culture, really every culture. Okay. But when we get to the modern age of mental health profession, psychology, psychiatry, here's my first question for you. When did the mental health profession start to address this issue of demonic possession? Can you provide us with a brief overview of the history here of psychologists and counselors starting to home in on this really what was previously a religious topic?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, Tim. And I think one of the things I was preparing for this episode that I started to realize very early on is that um, this has been an issue for the church. And what I mean by that is Christians in particular are the ones who have placed the focus on this aspect of the demonic possession and being a counseling issue, because I'll make this difference as we move through the episodes, but we have often conflated these psychological disorders with demonic possession, meaning that the more information that we've gathered throughout the years, so if we started in 1850s till now, there's been information gathering on mental health issues, right? Things that we didn't understand were just called demonic, right? If there are characteristics such as seeing things or hearing things, people, because they didn't know what that actually entailed in regards to a particular disorder, it was just called, oh, that's demonic. That must be demonic because I'm not experiencing that. That's abnormal behavior, right? We talked a little bit about abnormal behavior in one of our previous episodes. It was a deviation from the norm. So in regards to, has it made even an impact in the field of counseling? I don't think it has. I think what's happened is that the church or Christian counselors have, because they have an orientation to it, the spiritual realm, they have been able to focus on that a little bit more. So, and I hate to use this terminology, but it is kind of what it is, this aspect of it's a market. I mean, so the Christians who have gone through, who have done counseling are seeing spiritual issues come up with their clients, and they have to make the distinction of, is this a spiritual issue or is this a psychological disorder issue? And we'll get into schizophrenia, DID, even suicide a little bit later. But very interestingly enough, Deanne C. Klepper, she's an associate professor of religion from Boston University, and she put it this way: while thinking about mental illness as an attack by demons might seem silly to the scientifically minded among us, we clearly still operate out of a sense of fear of those who exhibit confusing, agitated, unusual behaviors. And I think it's going to be one of the key markers here, that aspect of fear. And then she says, I think that by taking a long look and using the evocative model of demonic obsession and response, we might be able to explore our own fears and prejudices towards people suffering from mental illness for whom we should have compassion. So to set the stage here, for those who are listening, if you have had thoughts about the spiritual realm, the supernatural, demonic obsession or possession and oppression, then this is probably going to make more sense to you. This was a struggle that I had in preparing for this, is that I don't dabble in talks about the demonic possession and obsession and oppression. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, though, right? So as a Christian, I understand. I mean, the Bible talks about this, that there's this aspect of we're at war with the principalities and powers. And Tim, you gave a great talk on that in our previous episodes. But yeah, so those who are Christian understand that. So we have almost a broader view of what's actually going on than secular counselors, because we take the spiritual aspect, I would say, much more seriously, right? So that's one of the things. And here's another interesting response from the supervising psychiatrist at Community Mental Health Center in Benton Harbor, I'm sorry. When asked if he believed in ghosts, and ghosts are different than spirits, but it's kind of like in the same realm. Professionally, no. Personally, I'm not sure. There are some ghosts that medication doesn't seem to get rid of, right? So some interesting data just on what people believe in regards to these beliefs. So polls from past decade tells that 40 to 50% of the population still believe in demonic possession. And there's some evidence that cases of reported possession have been on the rise in recent years. Survey results show that 44% of Americans over the age of 65 believe in demon possession, and 57 of those between ages of 47 to 65. So it comes back to that aspect of religion and spirituality. Because that's been declining throughout the years, you would assume, or we would assume, that there would be also a decrease in demonic possession, right? So only those who are spiritually minded, who are focused in this aspect of wanting to connect with their spiritual selves. There's so many things to choose from nowadays that I don't really know what's impacting the person in regards to their mental health, regarding this aspect of demonic possession. So historically, secular counselors have not really picked up on this aspect of demonic possession because it's seen more of a Christianity type of thing. So the ones who I'm seeing kind of making an imprint in that field are Christians who want to address the topic and are willing to go there. I don't feel competent to go into that space. And there's obviously going to be numerous trainings and areas where people can actually, deal with this aspect of demonic possession, deliverance. We will talk about that later. But I'm not there. And I'm still in a lot of ways wrestling with that.
Okay. So here's my second question. Maybe this will kind of dig deeper on the first question about the history of how the mental health profession has tried to address this, or maybe not, just kind of ignored it, I guess, in some ways, like kind of chalked it up to, well, that's a religious thing. We're going to focus on non-religious or secular things, let's say. How has the secular mental health profession explained the phenomenon of demon possession? So, whereas Christians, as you pointed out, they sometimes will conflate mental illness and demonic possession as like all one thing. They've done that, and we're both kind of aware of that. How has the mental health profession explained the phenomenon that is the apparent demon possession that someone might have, or let's say the characteristics of what a Christian might call a demon possession? How would a secular mental health professional explain that? Characteristics like, seeing people, speaking in different languages, self-harm and psychosis and all kinds of other things.
No, it's good. And I think it's important right here to look at these two different worldviews, meaning that there's one camp that is going to say it's psychological, and there's another camp that's going to say spiritual. So let's look at just these descriptions, and then just based on the descriptions, tell me what you would conclude from it, okay? And even though we kind of know some of this stuff. So suspiciousness, paranoid ideas, or uneasiness with others, trouble thinking clearly and logically, difficulty telling reality from fantasy, decline in self-care or personal hygiene, confused speech, or trouble communicating. So just with those descriptions, would you say that's a spiritual, a demonic possession, or would you say it's more of a psychological disorder?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think that my immediate response is I need more context.
Okay.
I need more information.
Okay.
Like it sounds like someone's delirious or something like that,
Okay. So when someone is experiencing,
sorry, I'm not giving you a good response.
No, that's perfect, because this is
sorry, I'll change my it's a demon.
It's whatever you believe about demon possession is going to influence your view of those things. So for example, those descriptions had to do with psychosis and delusion, right? But if someone is not is wanting to believe or has this perspective of, anything outside of the norm is demonic possession, then they're going to go with that. Oh, this is demon possession. You're being influenced by the demon of delusion or paranoia, right? Because I think we talked about this in our previous episodes, is that a lot of times with demons or with demon possession, they're given a name, right? And it can even be the demon of pride or something like that, right? So with a person who has that perspective, they're going to look at that and say, oh, it's the demon of paranoia. He's trying to get you to be paranoid about all the world around you. Everyone's out to get you. So we need to deal with that. We need to call that spirit out, and we need to, directly engage it and cast it out as a lie or something like that, right? But someone and typically this would be a secular counselor, they would look at that and say, no, this falls under psychosis and delusion. So maybe we need to get you on some medication so we could kind of minimize or limit the delusions, limit the psychosis, and then see what kind of treatment we can have after that, right? So whatever perspective, whatever camp you're on, that's the filter that they're going to be using in making these assessments.
Okay. So I'm glad you read those symptoms, because my next question was, can you offer some examples of mental health disorders where symptoms might mimic what's commonly associated with like supernatural things or demonic possession. Like what are some mental health disorders whose symptoms mimic or look similar to demonic possession?
Yeah.
What would be some examples of that?
It's good. Let's look at a couple more here, and then we'll determine what they are. Hallucinations, right? The idea of having these sensory experiences where you're hearing, seeing, or feeling things when there's nothing around you, right? So that could be this aspect of, oh, maybe there's spirits around me and they're oppressing me at this moment. That's a hallucination. But that's only one characteristic of this disorder that I'm going to discuss in a little bit. Disorganized thinking and speech. That's often associated with demonic possession. Why? Because it's a different language or it's just not making sense. And it's almost seen as this battle between the demon and the person's identity, right? And that's why there's this disorganized speech. Abnormal motor behavior, right? So when you see kind of people making these weird movements with their body, what does that tell you? Is that a demon taking over, or is that the person just kind of developing these type of movements because of their disease, right? Delusions, just false beliefs despite evidence that they are not true. So this would fall into the camp of schizophrenia, right? So schizophrenia, when you talk about the description, if a person doesn't do an accurate assessment or a good assessment of that person, and they have the worldview of demonic possession and obsession and oppression, then they're going to land in that camp, right? So they're going to try to look at it from a spiritual perspective, even though it might need a more psychological counseling approach to dealing with it. But a lot of these, I mean, schizophrenia is one. I mentioned psychosis, dissociative identity disorder. Look at these ones. A blurred sense of your own identity. So this aspect of, okay, someone who has the worldview of demonic possession is probably going to say, are there multiple identities being at war here with each other? Right? What's going on? What's going on with that?
That's dissociative identity disorder.
Dissociative identity disorder. Yeah. It used to be called multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
Then became dissociative identity disorder. And the idea behind that was these different parts of yourself needed to come up to protect you, to keep you safe from whatever it was that you experienced as a child. I'll probably show you this. I don't know if I showed this to you, Tim, or not, but there was this interview. It was a news report of this lady who had dissociative identity disorder. I showed it to my class, and she had 7 different identities. And they interviewed her and they said, okay, hey, so name your identities and just kind of give us a description of who they are. And obviously they're doing video of her, and she's describing each one. She says, hi, I'm Jan. I'm the carer. And then she'll go into this deep voice. I'm John. I'm the one who protects. And she's doing all of it, and her facial expressions change. Her voice changes. Their role within her life changes. Like all of those things were so distinct in that one interview. And each one of them had a specific role to keep her safe. So one of them, I think there was one that was a little girl. And basically hers role was to let her have fun, to just enjoy the small things in life. So she would kind of revert to this little girl stage where she would talk like a little girl. She would ask for like little baby carrots or something like that. So each personality had a role in her life. So that could be seen as something demonic, right? If you don't have the information about it, that seems demonic.
But it could be, but if it's DID, if it's true DID, it's the brain is.
It's the brain. It's fractured.
Yeah, the brain is fragmenting. Yeah.
It is
almost if you think of it as like almost like a pie chart where there's different slices of the pie that are personalities, and they're all taking turns in the spotlight.
Yeah.
There's actually a really good movie called Split. Have you seen Split?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's dark, folks. It's dark, but
there's another one I think that I don't think you've seen it, but that was a really good movie. You won't get it until you watch it to the end.
I think I know where you're going with it. Is that the one with John Cusack?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man. That is such a good one.
I know, man. I had to watch it 3 times before getting it.
Sorry, we're spoiling it for sure. Yeah, that is a good movie.
But that's a good movie. A lot of good roles in that one. But yeah, I mean, that was a good example of that. That particular case. But yeah, all of those things can seem demonic again. So for me as a Christian counselor, right, I'm looking at this and I have to make the distinction. Okay, what's at play here? What's the prominent issue here? Is it spiritual or is it trauma?
Mhm.
Right? Because DID is specifically with trauma related. But one of the points I was making as I was doing the research for this is that when you experience trauma, the ones who have the perspective of demonic possession, they see trauma as an opening for demon possession, right? So what they would argue is they would say, well, if someone's experienced a lot of trauma, it's most likely demon possession because trauma provides an opening for them to take over because you're in a vulnerable state.
So there's an overlay, let's say. This is their argument that there's real, like, let's say trauma and DID going on, but there's an overlay with like a demon would hide in that, let's say. Exactly. That's their language. I've heard like the demons hide in those things. Mm-hmm. As I've heard a Catholic priest say this, and I've heard, Protestant people say this who are in the exorcism world, where mental health hospitals are like a hotbed of demonic activity, because that's where the demons hide. They hide under the guise of mental illnesses. So there's like a real thing. There's a real physiological or physical thing going on in the brain, but behind that is also a spiritual reality as well. Yeah. So they're to give them credit, they're not saying it's all a demon, but they're not materialists either. Yeah, maybe. Exactly. Okay. So this kind of gets into my next question with you, just dealing with the secular world, the materialist explanation of this, that it's all in the brain. There's no supernatural explanation here. Are there dangers in denying the possibility of demonic influence or possession when it comes to mental health? Where do you think secular naturalistic explanations of demonic possession fall short? Or just where do you think that maybe not explanations of demonic possession, but explanations of mental health fall short? Like, essentially, is there a danger in denying the possibility of demonic influence?
It clashes a little bit with my approach or with my worldview in regards to it. But I think the idea or the important thing for everyone to take away is that you have to be open to that element, to the aspect there is a possibility for demonic possession. So from a counselor perspective, we need to do our due diligence and really try to figure out, what the root issue is. So is there a danger in it? Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a danger in it, because if you don't assess correctly, you can't treat the problem, right? So one of the things that I would like to look at, we do an intake form and we look at their history. And one of the things, I don't think I've seen that personally on an intake position, but I know of people who have. And one of them is if they've been involved in the occult, or if their parents have been involved in satanic type of activities. So if that's a part of their history, in my mind, that's part of my assessment. I'm saying, okay, so what
your radar's up.
Radar's on, right? Yeah. And I'm looking at that. I'm like, okay, what are they presenting? And then if they are presenting these different facets, and again, even my experience with schizophrenia, the ID is limited just because of the population that I work with. But in seeing interviews or seeing testimonies of people who have worked with them, I mean, it's gonna look different. And I haven't heard, and remember, I'm in a Christian setting with Christian counselors, as many of them say that the trauma that they work with has been demon related. It's very small. Now, we know a couple of professors who do deliverance work, and they do work with, demonic possessions and oppressions and so on. But that hasn't been the norm. And again, we're talking about Christian circles that are more open to the spiritual realm and the damage that it can do to Christians, right? And we talked a little bit about this, and I'd like to get your perspective on that too, is that, it's different with Christians too. They can be oppressed by demons, but they can't be possessed by them, right? So that worldview will also play a role in how they treat their clients. Are all our clients Christian? Are some clients Christian, but they've been involved in satanic practices? So I think that the danger is not considering it as a potential factor.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So let me ask you this, and maybe we can both kind of dive into this one. Are there anecdotes or stories, not antidotes, but anecdotes, as people get that wrong, that would confirm the reality of the spiritual realm to you? And I leave that broadly as the spiritual realm, not just demonic possession, but we could talk about that. Like, are there stories or anecdotes in your experience as a mental health profession, or just even just as a Christian, that confirm that yeah, demon possession is a real thing and it can happen at times? Or maybe, and we can explain this, maybe not demon possession, but demonization, like the demonic influence or oppression, we might call it.
Yeah. I think a couple of examples that I'm thinking of right now that I have interacted with a lot, and I think Christians or counselors with the mindset of they're open to the reality of demonic possession, oppression, and so on. Suicidal behavior. For a good while, that was often associated with demonic possession, right? Because it's this aspect of destroying the body. And what way does one seek to destroy the body? Suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation, suicidal behavior, cutting, and so on. So a lot of dark practices there. So when we talked about suicidal behavior in Christian circles, imagine someone comes in, right, and they're cutting themselves. A lot of that has to do with I'd rather feel physical pain than emotional pain. So there's a lot of cutting involved. But then they step it up a notch, and now they've had an suicidal attempt, right? They loaded a gun, knife, whatever the case is. Imagine that person who's struggling and suffering and don't want anything to do with their life at that moment. A person comes in and they have the perspective of demonic possession. They say, it's a demon. It very well could be. So they might do a deliverance and they might cast out that demon, and maybe that's the end of it. There's no more suicidal ideation. But if it's not that, so if I misdiagnose that, then I don't get to treat the person for what they're actually suffering with, right? There's a reason why they wanted to take their life. There's a reason why they're at that stage in their life. Usually loneliness, right? No social support, ongoing problems or situations, trauma in their background, a lot of different reasons for that. But I have to diagnose correctly, right? So there was a time where suicidal behavior was attached to demonic possession. And I don't know if you've heard that yourself or have seen that.
Well, I think that kind of plays into the earlier problem that you mentioned of just different mental health issues being reduced down to demonic influence or possession.
Yeah.
I think what I'm getting at with this question is more so not to that you have to share a ghost story or anything like that, because when it comes to this topic, even with my students, when I'm talking about angelology and demonology, I tell them I'm not here to tell ghost stories, and I'm not here to like tell you like little spooky things to give you goosebumps. Like, I don't want to do that, because one, it can create that obsession mindset, and two, it could give glory to the powers of darkness that I don't want to give. But I guess what I'm asking is, in your experience, do you believe that you personally, or maybe there's someone in a coworker that has come across a situation where you're like, yeah, we're dealing with not just a person here, but a spiritual entity behind that?
Yeah, I'm thinking of one client. His was major delusion. He thought he was the president's son.
Nice. Hunter Biden or someone else?
Someone else.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And he just thought he was the president's son, and he wanted to get in touch with him. And he affirmed to me that, I am his son, and there's no denying it, right? But that wasn't demonic. I'm trying to think of. Here's what I will share. I have had a client who, it felt like you feel a darkness as you're talking with him. It was just this blank stare, and as I was engaging with him, I felt so consumed by like a sense of darkness. It was the weirdest thing, and he himself had experienced a lot of trauma. But he was just quiet throughout our session and just kind of slowly responding, slowly engaging. But there was just sense of darkness that I felt, and I don't know how else to explain that. And I have had some coworkers share a little bit about that too, just a feeling of darkness and overwhelmness in the overwhelming nature in the session. But that's as far as my experience goes in regards to that aspect of demonic activity or feelings.
Okay. Yeah, I can't say that I've experienced something where it defies, it 100% defies a scientific explanation, let's say. Now that doesn't mean that I haven't experienced something. I want people to understand that. I think as an apologist, a lot of times when it comes to proving the supernatural stuff, I oftentimes my method is always asking, can this be explained by other means first?
Yeah.
Not that those other means are the explanation, but could they be an explanation? Because I'm interested in showing or proving elements of the evidence for Christianity, essentially. So when I think about this topic of demon possession and the supernatural, and I would also throw in there just religious experiences, supernatural religious experiences. I think about it in terms of what examples defy, scientific explanation, let's say. I don't have any of those myself. I do have experiences in my past where I believe I did encounter something, but not to an extent where it's like, proof, 100%. I will say, I do know I have friends, some who are professional counselors who, and then I've listened to other people who are professional counselors, or they work in a psych ward and things like that, who have experienced things that basically defy a naturalistic explanation. One in particular, she remembered she was working with a client. There was multiple people in this room, and she was working with this client. And I don't know if she was a primary counselor or if she was just there for support. I don't really know the details of this one, but she said this girl was acting out and kind of being just disturbing in some ways. And the counselor, she was kind of sitting, or maybe the assistant, she was sitting off to the side. She wasn't saying anything. She was just there. She didn't even close her eyes, but she started praying silently in her mind. She didn't like bow her head or kneel or anything like a Tim Tebow in the room or something like that, She just was praying silently in her mind. And she said the girl stopped whatever she was doing, looked at her and said, don't pray like that, or stop praying. Yeah. So the girl knew she was praying. She kind of had that awareness of what was going on. And so that would be an example of well, that's, unless the girl had a heightened sense of intuition, that would be an example. And I've heard a very similar story to that, of a guy. This was actually on a YouTube interview I was listening to, of a Christian man who he started off working in a psych ward, and then I think he got involved in some sort of deliverance ministry, which I want to ask you about in just a minute. But he said, his first encounter with this was he was in a psych ward, and he was just in charge of watching this guy that was on suicide watch. Again, the overlap of suicide. And so he just had to watch this guy all night long. And as he was sitting there watching this guy and the guy's sleeping, he felt great compassion for him. And he just started praying for him silently in his mind. Now the guy's sleeping, okay? And no one else is around. And he said, as he started to pray, the guy started to toss and turn on his bed, violently, kind of uncomfortably, like something's, pushing him. And then he said the guy sat up and then looked at him and said, stop praying for him. He's ours. And the Christian psych ward worker said he just froze. He's like, I had no idea what to do in that moment.
Yeah.
And it wasn't he said it wasn't this demon was trying to terrorize him. It was don't do, he's ours. Don't, what are you doing? Stop that, And so he said he just stood up and he got someone else to kind of like, I guess, fill in for him. And he went and made a phone call to his mom or something, you know, in the room. He said, "Hey, I can't tell you what's going on, but just pray indiscriminately for this. There's a guy in this ward that needs a lot of prayer. So if you can get your people together and just start praying." And they prayed for several hours, you know, his mom and their friends. And then he went back to this guy and kept praying for him. And he's like, I don't remember the conversation, but I think he said something like, he said to the demon, like, "You can't tell me not to pray. Like, I'm allowed to pray."
Right.
You know? Yeah. And he said that by the end of the night, that guy, I think that the spirit essentially left the guy. I don't know. I don't remember how he described how that was, but essentially the guy was delivered in that way. So that's on YouTube. It's Doug Van Dorn has a podcast. It was on his podcast. But it was a really interesting story that the guy told.
You know, but that brings up a good point though, Tim, too, is the exposure to experiences like that.
Yeah.
Like when someone shares those stories with me, like, it's not like I question them. Like, no, I don't think it was that. It's like, I believe it. It's just from my personal experience, when I'm experiencing it, it's like, okay, I have to make that distinction. But I know people in psych wards, I mean, they have so many stories like that. Yeah. And part of their job would be, okay, that was very distinct, right? This idea of he's ours, right? Yeah. This aspect of demonic possession. So that seems pretty clear cut. But in other instances where you see DID wouldn't show up that way. Yeah. DID would show up in a, shift in the person's personality, in their, facial expressions.
And showing almost an unawareness of the other personalities usually. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah. So it's whatever is needed at that time. So if the protector, that's what's going to come up. If it's more of the safety, the caring mother, or whatever the case is, that's going to come up. But yeah, so I'm curious how those people who work in the cycle, how they make those distinctions. Because when you're exposed to it so much, like your natural instinct is to, well, this is my experience, so it's going to be in this realm.
I think if you're a Christian, I think this is where prayer does come in, because as I've heard many people in the exorcist space doing exorcisms will say prayer wounds demons. It wounds them. I don't know how that works. I won't pretend to know how that works. But Jesus does say, like this disciples come back to him a couple times. They can't cast out someone. And in one instance, he says, this type does not come out except through prayer and fasting. So there's in the spiritual world, in the spiritual laws that God has put up, there's something I think if I can just spitball here and surmise, something about prayer communicates our dependence on God, our allegiance to God. I think I said this in the previous episode. The spiritual realm, comes from Carlos Martins, who's a Catholic priest. I just like how he says this. The spiritual realm is very juridical in that it's legal. It's a place of combat of legal claims primarily. Not that it can't manifest itself in physical things, but and that makes sense if you read the scriptures. Like there's the divine counsel of God in the court, but then there's these spiritual laws and there's principalities and powers that can affect things in the world, but there are disputes that go on in the spiritual world. Jude alludes to this with Satan disputing with Michael over the body of Moses. That's a really weird instance. We can't get into that, but right now. But I think like prayer is one of these things that shows our reliance on the Lord. And it wounds a demon. That's at least in the way, if we were to think about it in those kind of human terms. Yeah. Not that they have bodies or anything, but that seems to be. So I think prayer is one of those things that can elicit the supernatural, as opposed to just like concluding, oh, DID is demonic possession.
Yeah. And I did want to add this aspect, because I know one of the questions that you had mentioned are things that make this the reality of the spiritual realm kind of. What are some examples of that? And actually, one of the things that I was looking at, this one was interesting, about a young woman in Montana who was suffering from the effects of demonization. In all three incidents, she divulged the name of a young man involved, so that she had committed fornication 3 times. and each time an evil spirit had entered her. She named the name of the young man, renounced the evil spirit of fornication from said name, and then she was delivered. So it was this interesting aspect of, again, if a person is within that worldview, then they're going to see those experiences as demonic. Now, this was in Montana. And I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, I think Montana kind of has like a liberal lean towards it. I don't know what the lifestyle is like there in regards to.
You mean like in terms of religious?
In terms of religion.
Oh,
like very,
there's it's syncretistic. There's of course, evangelicals out there, but there's a lot of Mormons. There's Native American religion, New Age religion. So yeah, the Western United States is a hotbed of occultism and New Age religion.
Mm-hmm. So all of those things that they kind of add to this. Another more recent one is kind of the idea of stones and their energy.
Oh, crystals.
Yeah. So you have the crystals part. It's like, okay, well, there's this energy. Like, here's the energy of, what's one that I was thinking about? This one's like intellectualism. Like, this one will make you really smart. And then there's this one over here. So all of those things that people are dabbling with, that's going to inform all these different. Does that provide an opening for demonic?
I would say it does.
Right. And that would be part of the assessment, is that if someone comes in and I know that they're using crystals and they have a strong belief in those crystals, then in my mind, I'm seeing, okay, that's an opening for demonic possession. Are they displaying any symptoms of that? And so on. Yeah. Right. I don't know if any of these things are directly connected to like DID or schizophrenia or anything like that. But again, because crystal is kind of like this doorway into a spiritual realm, I would be very much aware of that for demonic possession, if that was the case.
Yeah, and something I mentioned earlier, there seems to be many times an overlay where if you have mental health disorders presenting, there could be an overlay with a demonic entity that is hiding within those, if not causing them, hiding in them. Why would I say hiding? Like, what, why would they do that? Well, if you track with the last two episodes that we talked about, there's good incentive for, let's say, these spiritual entities to hide, to conceal themselves within people. We often think about if you watch Hollywood, it's like you get all kinds of presentations of the supernatural realm, the evil side. Let's say you could, you have like some superhuman guy that gets to be president of the United States, and he's demon possessed. Or there's a movie called Fallen with Denzel Washington. It's a decent movie, but it's about this fallen angel named Azazel, which is actually the name of a demon in the Bible. But this guy can just jump from body to body at will, possessing whoever he wants. And he's I forget the plot of the movie, but he's trying to accomplish something. And Denzel Washington is this cop that's on the beat investigating this thing. It's like, it's so comical to think about it. Like, this cop is going to investigate, this ancient super intelligence, non-embodied thing, anyway. So, but then you get examples of like The Exorcist and all the gross or paranormal activity and things like that. These horror movies that are out, just way out there, not out there in the sense of not true, but like intended to scare people.
Right. And I think that speaks to, again, this part of mass hysteria can also explain this. There was a article I was reading about that was talking about.
Do you mind if I jump? Sorry. Let me just finish this point really quick. That at least in my studies, and again, I don't want to present myself as an expert that's like a exorcist or something, but like in listening to accounts of reputable Christians, either Roman Catholic or Protestant or Eastern Orthodox, I've listened to all of them. I read a lot on this subject. There seems to be this common trait of the powers of darkness, evil spiritual entities, demons, do want to hide. They don't want to be discovered. They want to destroy. Some of them want actually to kill people. They want to destroy people, but some of them want to hide inside them because it gives them a place to live and an abode to like, influence and possess people. Now we can get into theories about why that is, what the nature of demons are. That gets into like, are they fallen angels or are they disembodied Nephilim, but we can get into that subject. But
previous 2 episodes. Yep.
Yeah, but there's debates about that. But essentially, seems to be this agreement among people in this space, Christians in this space, that the demons who are influenced people don't want to be found out, and so it makes sense for them to hide on this overlay of mental health issues. So that's all I'll say on it. Is that it makes sense that they would hide.
Oh yeah. I mean, even I guess even in scripture, when they were being, I guess, discovered, or when they were being addressed by Jesus. I mean, they were like, did you say they were like shocked?
Oh yeah, the torment. Yeah, so that's the story of the man of Gadarenes. Now that's an extreme story where the guy he's crazy and he's terrorizing everyone, and he's cutting himself, and he lives among the tombs and things like that. But the story goes that when Jesus, he steps out onto the shore in this Gentile controlled territory, this guy, sees him, and there's some debate about whether the guy himself or the demons bring the guy to Jesus. I think the guy maybe had some awareness that it's Jesus. Anyway, the guy finds himself face to face with Jesus, and then the demons are shrieking and saying, like, what do you have to do with us, Son of Man? Like, are you here to throw us in the pit before? Are you here to judge us before the time? And so they're asking, like, what are you doing here? Don't torment us, So they're really worried that he's going to cast them out. And then they beg him, well, if you're going to cast us out of this guy, cast us into the pigs, put us into the pigs. Why? That's such a strange request to us. That is such a strange request. But so there's seems to be this desire to embody things and hide in them in some way. No, but the fortune teller that Paul and Silas encounter, I think it's in Lystra. I can't remember the city right now. I think it's Lystra where they encounter this. She's a fortune teller. She makes a lot of money for the men of the city, and she follows Paul and Silas around. And then at some point, Paul gets really annoyed, and he just turns around and casts the spirit out of her, because the spirit gave her supernatural power to know the future and other things. And he just casts out the spirit from her, and then there goes their money-making scheme. Right. And so the men of the city are really mad. So yeah, that would be an example where, like, those are examples of like supernatural power and presentation. But Satan hid inside Ananias. Yeah. Or at least he filled his thoughts, let's say. So Peter's like, Ananias, why has Satan filled your thoughts? Ananias was not aware of that, at least with that we know of. Yeah. That's good. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That was a long answer. No, you're good. Let me, so you were going to say something.
I was just going to talk about the idea of mass hysteria, and how that influenced, some demonic possession. It's, I think it was in Malaysia in the 1970s. There was the cases of demonic possession, which coincidentally happened or spiked in the U.S. following the release of the movie The Exorcist in 1973.
Oh, I would believe it.
So that would make a lot of sense. So if you're having that exposure to something that's so, real for some people in a different part of the world, I mean, that would make a lot of sense. So the belief that there is this world, it's that whole idea of, if you've never been exposed to it, the more you see it, the more you start to believe, right? And that movie really brought that up. And I think for me, as a counselor, I bet you if I would to see it more, if I were to work in a psych ward, I mean, this would feel much more real to me, So I'm not denying that it's not real. I'm not saying that it's not real. I'm saying I would feel it much more real.
Yeah, you'd be much more aware.
Much more aware. Yeah. And maybe obviously more insight even into it.
Well, it's kind of like if you're, the classic example of someone who's like walking, they don't realize they're walking close to the edge of a cliff until they know, like they look around and then they're terrified. Yeah. Something like that. So let me ask you this. You've mentioned deliverance ministries, and as we've been talking, so just as we're getting close to the end here, can you explain what deliverance ministries are? And what are some pros and cons of those ministries, and maybe some methodological problems, but maybe some positives as well? Can you kind of just we'll do a series on deliverance ministry down the road. So, but just give us a brief kind of synopsis of what they are, pros and cons, things like that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to reference this book from Charles Kraft. It's called "Getting Information," or it was the topic he was dedicating to was getting information from demons, and he talks about this emphasis on commanding evil spirits in the name of Jesus to do these three things: reveal who they are when they enter the person, and why they have a right to be in the person. So this whole aspect of deliverance is seeking out that evil spirit or seeking out that demon, having it declare its name, and then casting it out. But that's essentially how they report it. And gosh, I wish I would have gone to one of them. I know a couple of students went to a deliverance session a couple of times, and they talked about here's what they did. So they basically sat down with the client, and I think they started to pray over the client. Then they said, okay, demon, name yourself. And then they would say pride, or they would say lust, or they would say anger, or something like that. And then they would start questioning the anger. Why is it there? Why are you inhabiting this person? This whole aspect of just kind of questioning. And Charles Kraft here in this article, he starts to point out a couple of things of how to get information from these evil spirits in the process of setting people free. And he says 6 reasons why it's helpful to get information from these evil spirits. So here's what he's saying. Much information can be obtained that can be used against the demons. So part of asking that anger. And again, very similar to counseling, right? This idea of, okay, what's going on in your life? Okay, how can we counter those negative thoughts, those negative beliefs, and so on? In this case, he says it can be used against the demon. So I don't know what information they're exactly looking for, but there's a reason why the anger is there. There's a reason why the lust is there. There's a reason why maybe the pride is there, and so on. So that would make sense, right? The information received can speed up inner healing and lead to quicker deliverance. For example, if a demon reveals when and why they are in a person, that helps the deliverance minister get to the root cause quicker. Very similar to counseling. Inner healing of the person requires more information than just knowing that a demon is present. Forcing evil spirits to give information weakens them, making it easier to force them to leave their victim. So that one's really interesting too, right? Because the more information you have, the more tools you have or weapons you have to fight against it. When the victim hears the demons confess their lies and how they have trapped the person, it gives the person confidence that freedom is possible. So this is going to speak to, I think I told you over text, we were talking about different books. One was called The Bondage Breaker. And The Bondage Breaker focuses a lot on the lies that the devil uses to get you to believe, about your depression, about your anxiety, and so on. So it's kind of like there's this CBT approach here to questioning the demon that's in the person. And lastly, again, this is on 6 reasons why it's helpful to get this information. When the victim learns to recognize the demon's voice during the deliverance session, it makes it easier for the person to recognize that same voice if the demon comes back later. So very interesting. And these sessions, so I've heard, Tim, some of these sessions can go up to 3 hours. So it's one session, 3 hours dealing with one particular demon. Sometimes it comes out differently. I think Dr. Fisher one time that he got violent and started swinging and doing all these different things. And you're just like, whoa, how do I deal with this? So again, just trying to get the person to regulate again. But those are 6 reasons why they would ask for the information. But Kraft also mentioned 6 cautions. And he says, don't trust what demons say without cross-checking. So similar to counseling, when we're asking questions to a client, we're checking to see if their story makes sense. Okay, well, you said that you've been trying to work in this area, but over here you kind of still keep repeating the same pattern. You still let your friend cross these boundaries. Tell me, how are you making sense of that? So it seems that the same approach is taken with these demons, right? Since evil spirits are lying spirits, and that's a big part of this, right? Spirits are going to be lying. It's important to command them in the name of Jesus to tell the truth. Demons are deceitful. Often they tell half-truths in order to mislead. We talked a little bit about that in a previous episode. Never let demons take control of a deliverance session. What would that look like? I'm not sure, honestly. I think one of it is just when they start going crazy in regards to violence, explosive, cussing. I know that's a big part of it too, because they don't want to be removed. One of the most common tactics demons use is to bluff and intimidate in order to keep control of the victims. And there is no magic formula that guarantees that you can get the information you want. So Kraft suggests that each practitioner experience to find his or her best way. And here was some of, I don't know if it's frustration because I just my minimal exposure to it, but like counseling, everyone has a different approach, right? And everyone has kind of like their own orientation and how they're going to approach it differently. So even when it comes to deliverance, people are going to do it differently. Some people might address it right away. Some people might actually lay hands on the person. Some people might use a lot of prayer. So there's a lot of different ways in which people do deliverance. So I'm just sharing just one aspect, and Kraft shares this other aspect of what to be careful for, why it's good to question the demons. So it could look different for a lot of different counselors who do engage in addressing these demons.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
So that's a good snapshot of what deliverance ministry is. Now, I think when we do our series, we'll dive into some I think healthy forms of that, and then maybe some very unhealthy forms of that I've heard, not heard of, but I've heard the leaders of those ministries describing what they do. And I'm just scratching my head, like we're pulling my hair out saying like, what,
right.
what, trying to interview the demons and find out secret conspiracies and all this. I'm like, what? Anyway, and we'll get into that.
And there's a lot of ethical concerns here too, Tim. Like for someone, if someone's a LPC and someone has been in the field, I mean, again, this has been my point throughout the episode is that I don't feel prepared enough to engage or do any type of deliverance. Now I can sit in on someone who knows how to do it and try to learn. But if you as a listener are thinking about this or wanting to get more information on this, I know people who do it, you can email them and see if they'll let you kind of sit in on those things. And again, there's a lot of issues along with that. So I do worry from a professional standpoint for those who do deliverance work that they do so as a ministry, not necessarily as a, practicing counselor, because that's going to require some levels of training and certifications to be able to do that. So I would caution that if you are looking into that you make sure that it's just ministry based. Like I said, I think part of my preparation for this was learning that it's much more spiritual than it is a professional practice. It seems that churches kind of create these ministries to help people who have been involved in, spiritual warfare like this, where there's demon possession. But I haven't seen as much of it in counseling other than the experience that people have had where they see these things happening. But I don't see people treating that demon possession. They just share their experience. Here's what I saw and here's how I felt that experience.
Yeah. All right. Last question.
Yep.
Any resources you would recommend to our listeners?
My resource is Tim.
What?
Sorry. And here's why, again, going back to the idea.
Source. I made it up.
No, I did not prepare any research because I didn't read anything about.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
This
makes sense. Yeah.
So, for me, it was more so about, okay, if you want to explore that realm, there's the books that we've been talking about, which It's Only a Demon. Angel, ask him for those book resources. Because I just don't dabble in that field, even though I'm aware of it. So hopefully you guys understand kind of where I'm coming from.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And there's other resources that I do want to recommend eventually, but I'm not done reading them. And so I don't want to recommend books that I haven't read unless I trust the author, and I know a little bit about what the book is about, but there's some books that I'm actually reading right now that I'll probably recommend down the road, but I kind of want to work through them myself first.
Yeah. And you could one of the things that I was reading through a lot was just a lot of different experiences because I'm just trying to piece together, do these experiences make sense? How would they make the distinction between a psychological disorder and whether or not it was demon possession? So again, what I found was that it's going to depend on what their worldview is. Yeah. If they land more on this side with demon possession, then they're going to look at it from that perspective. If they're more clinical, they're going to be able to distinguish this is the socioid identity disorder, this schizophrenia, suicidal ideation, whatever the case is. But yeah, the person has to have some sort of spiritual background.
Here's some resources I would not recommend to people. Okay. Hollywood movies, shows,
yes,
anything that is intended to scare you, entertain you with horror. Mm-hmm. present you with some sort of curious fascination with darkness, anything like that. Board games like the Ouija board, anything like that. Stay away from it.
Yeah. Yeah. What about that, Tim? Like people who love horror movies, like, are they more vulnerable to this as well?
Yeah. I mean, so.
Sorry, I didn't mean to throw a last question.
Yeah.
But,
you know,
I know a lot of people.
I think that there can reach a level where someone is so fascinated with darkness and death and other things that it can open a door. I don't know if I wouldn't say that that's like a science that happens all the time, but I would say that certainly if there are doorways, that certainly could be one. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. Okay. But yeah, I would say, like The Exorcist, any of the Exorcist movies, Paranormal Activity, anything like that. Like I've seen some of those movies, and I think if I watched them now, I probably would see them under a different light than when I was younger. When I was younger, they were terrifying, Yeah. Except for like the old Exorcist movie that never really scared me. Mm-hmm. But the movie,
how old were you when you saw it?
I was a teenager. I thought it was silly, but like horror movies like Michael Myers, oh man, they terrified me.
It's true. The real ones like Freddy Krueger for me, like nightmares.
Yeah. Or the movie The Exorcism of Emily Rose. That's one of the scariest movies I've ever seen.
Really?
Yeah. But so those kind of movies, I think about. I don't want to watch them, but I think about them now. I'm like, those were intended to scare me and to entertain other people. Mm-hmm. And it's like, I just don't open yourself up to those things. Like, and also don't base your theology on those things. That's what people do all the time. I see that all the time. People base their theology of angels and demons on shows and movies rather than on the scriptures.
Yeah, it's good.
And don't do that. So read the books we recommended in the previous episodes and start there. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to do one more episode on this subject, and that's just like a Q&A kind of episode. So stay tuned, folks.
All right. See you next time.